Hello everyone, today we're taking a look at the DarwinFPV BabyApe 3-inch. And I think DarwinFPV has kind of become known as one of those brands that's really inexpensive. And they appear to be an assembler, so they buy parts and then they make quads out of them. They probably cut their own frames. And as you can see there are some extras on there. We've got these LEDs out here on the arms that make for quick motor swapping if we needed to do that. But the budget part of this is a little bit surprising. This quad comes in at just under $70, so $69.99, 1 penny under $70. And that kind of feels like one of those prices where it's too good to be true, right? So we got to see what we get. The motors are unbranded. The specs state that they are 1104 4300 kV motors. The props appear to be the Gemfan 3016 tri-bladed 3-inch props. The all-in-one flight controller down here is spec'd as a F411 with a 15 amp ESC with a peak amp rating of 17 amps for 10 seconds. VTX right here supports TBS Smart Audio Protocol for switching your power, and it goes from 0 milliwatts or bit mode all the way up to 200 milliwatts. The FPV camera is labeled as the Darwin 205 700 TV line FPV camera. We've got LEDs on all arms, and the motors do run through those LEDs, so it's a little bit like race wire. The arms are replaceable. The top battery mat is rubberized and textured. Battery holder is a rubber band. You get 2 extra rubber bands, some zip ties, and some screws. Of course, we get a couple of round DarwinFPV stickers. We also get a printed wiring map for our all-in-one flight controller. Arms appear to be 2.5 millimeters thick, look like 6 millimeters wide. The bottom plate is 1.5 millimeters. Top plate is also 1.5 millimeters. Camera protection plates are also 1.5 millimeters. It weighs just a touch over 72 grams. I flew it on this GNB 450 milliamp 3S battery, which brings the weight up to 113.25 grams. So as we sit here, you can see that I've got LQ up in the top right-hand corner. That's because I'm running the Express LRS receiver with a little cube or plastic antenna. And hopefully you noticed as we were sitting there on the table, that camera is definitely not current generation. This would be an older style generation camera, and it's also got a fairly narrow field of view. That narrow field of view made my first few flights pretty sporty. You know, I'm used to a wider field of view with modern day cameras, as well as some of our micro cameras are really wide field of view. That's actually my preference, see as much as possible. But this one feels like it's substantially narrower than any other camera I've flown in the last couple years. So that's one area where you probably have to look at this and weigh whether it's something that you might need to change out. And changing it out is just not going to be a straight swap, because it's not the 14 millimeters from screw mount to screw mount on the camera that we typically find on most of our nano or micro sized cameras. It's a little bit wider than that. So we're going to have to do something if we want to swap the camera out to cover that little gap. The current mount in there holding this camera in place does cover that gap, but if we take that out, of course, we're going to have to cover that gap between whatever camera we choose and that gap. But as far as it flies, it's a little bit hard to tell. I think this could give you the sense that it's possibly moving slower because of the narrow field of view than it actually is. I was a little bit surprised that with just 1104 and 3-inch props, they are low pitch props, that it handled them pretty well. This is the default tune as it arrived to me. I did not tweak the tune out. All I do is put the OSD elements where I like to have them, and when you come to this channel where you can expect to find them, and put my rates in and charge and go fly. I did change the battery voltage too on the warning after a few flights to kind of get used to where the battery starts to issue its default warning at 3.5 volts per cell versus where I want it, so that I can kind of gauge and come in to land and disarm where I'm at 3.5 volts per cell without that low battery warning just annoying us on screen. And the flight time is actually pretty good with a 450. I think you could very easily go up to, say, a 550. And then if you do more cruisy type of flights, you can go above that as well. Of course, as you add battery weight with any quad, it changes the flight characteristics. They become a little, especially with micros. I guess I should speak to what I know. I do micros. So in micros, when you add battery weight, they become a little less agile. They have a little less, sudden thrust. So you have to kind of adjust for that. You can also see in my DVR recording that I get some black bars on both the left and right hand side, and on the left hand side we actually have a little bit of movement in the image near the black bars. That's not normal. I haven't seen that, I think, in any other FPV camera that I've flown. but it's not unflyable. I think that's kind of a driving point, is that after about 4 or 5 flights, I got the hang of it. You know, my first several flights, because of the narrow field of view, I would end up clipping things like branches or trees, or just outright crashing because my judgment was off as far as going my normal path and doing my normal things. But, you know, get 4 minutes of flight on a 450 milliamp battery, that's pretty good. It doesn't seem to come with a receiver, so that's something that you should prepare if you do want to get one of these. And for anyone who's bought a Darwin FPV product, I am sure interested in knowing what your experience is with the components that you've bought or the products that you've bought from Darwin FPV, as well as any sort of support issues. This is a first for me. This is the first time I've owned a Darwin FPV product, so I definitely want to build some knowledge that you might have in your dealings and findings with Darwin FPV products. Because, you know, at $70, it's tough to find a quad at $70. Even without a receiver, it's tough to find a quad at $70. And I was fully prepared when I saw the price to have to tune this. But thankfully, they already put a tune on it. And there you can see my daughter. You may have heard her. She's out working on her History Day project. That's an academic endeavor of hers that she competes in. And we've landed and disarmed, and we can see our battery is above 3.5 volts per cell. One thing that I forgot to mention during the flight was that this comes with Betaflight 4.2.5, so not the most recent version, but a relatively recent version. So that's something else to keep in mind. And quite honestly, I'm a little surprised they added these LEDs, because that's extra cutting and soldering that they had to do for each motor, for each arm. And then we've got heat shrink around where the wires attach on each side. So that's a fair bit of extra work. I'm actually surprised at this price point that they would go to that extra work. So that was one thing that I was surprised by. The motors, at least as far as the exterior design, they remind me a lot of the motors that we found years ago on the Emax original Baby Hawk, I think it was, or was it the Tiny Hawk? And also, no, I did not use the screws to tighten those, to keep my props on, because they just weren't necessary. I tried it like this, and they fit on nice and snug and tight. So I flew it, and if I would have had any problems, then I would have put the screws in, but I didn't, thankfully. The camera angle, I was flying at the maximum camera angle. There's not a lot of camera angle to be had, and I did mention it in the quick specs on how this space is wider than a typical 14 millimeter camera would be, so it's not a straight swap. Let me get a Caddx Ant out here, which is I think a modern day good replacement for this sort of camera. You can see this one's kind of beat up. It's kind of I would need to refocus that one, but it's good for our purposes here. So where you can see that it's a little bit bigger than the camera is. You know, you've got 3 millimeters probably on each side. You can probably use a nylon nut on each side, or you can use a rubber gasket or something on each side. I do think most people would want to replace the camera. Again, it's not unflyable. It's just it's narrow, and the image quality isn't what we typically get in most modern or current products. So I think that's one area where they did save some money. They do have camera protection, as far as you know, we don't see that a lot in micros anymore. We've got a lot of micros like this new Crux 3, where the lens is essentially in a canopy, and the canopy barely has any areas where it might serve some protection. But in this case, I have to give them credit. They have camera plates out here with carbon fiber, and you know, we square something, as long as it's at least as wide as those two camera plates, it should protect the camera. One of the things about the carbon that we can test to see if it's, you know, what kind of quality carbon is. I know everybody likes to look at it, but as far as the stiffness goes, you know, not bad for something at this weight. It's not horrible flexible. You know, I have to get my thumbs in here in the center. We got good clearance, good long arms, disc loading. So yeah, I'm not disappointed. I don't find those to be extremely flexible. I should note here on the back, I did add this zip tie myself. I felt that was necessary in order to make sure that, you know, if I have a battery ejection with just a rubber band on here, that we don't tug on this. I say this all the time, so I feel like a bit of a broken record, but I used one of my blue zip ties to pinch that lead down, and that actually helps also when you put your battery on here. That well, typically I was going like this, then I twist my battery leads, and then I plug in. So with this very short lead out here, it keeps my wires from getting down here where the props might be able to strike them. My receiver down in there, you can see it right back there, the little cube. Got an Express LRS receiver down there. I love Express LRS. It's my go-to nowadays. Hopefully it is for you too. It's going to take care of so many problems we've had in micros. The soldering looks clean. I don't see... This solder joint on the red might be a touch low temperature. It looks a little bit dull. It's not quite as shiny as I would like. But overall, I didn't find it to be messy or unclean. This all-in-one board is fairly unique. Hopefully you can see that, to where it's kind of two layers that's together. You know, they're not separate or anything. But let me zoom in. See how that all-in-one board has kind of got those two layers right there in the dead center? You've got your mount layer and then you've got your component layer up there. I don't think I have seen that before. Our VTX does mount to the top of the quad, so that's something to notice. And we do have very low clearance in there. But, you know, if we've got enough clearance to where we can crash it a few times, that's enough clearance. And we do have a capacitor here in the back. I did try to read that in between cuts. I just can't quite get my eyes on it. I would suspect that's probably somewhere around 16 volt capacitor, maybe 300 or 400 microfarads. I just can't quite see it. Got a little plant life back in there. There we go, got it out. That looks like the battery mat might have got over tightened here in the front a little bit. That's from the possibly me, because I did have to take the top plate off, but that's over the VTX area. And I don't believe I did anything with the VTX area in order to get my receiver in there. So I think that just kind of got over tightened. It's not a deal breaker. At least they used a rubber battery mat. That'll give us a fighting chance of keeping our battery down. Of course, with this sort of top plate design, we can easily get a strap through either location behind this screw set here or in front of the screw set. So if you wanted to use a typical battery strap, you definitely could do that. As far as arm replacement goes, it looks like we're going to have 3 screws for an arm. Technically 4 out here, so 1, 2, 3, and then those 4 out there to replace an arm. And then the heat shrink that's on there, whether you replace that or you just use electrical tape, you know, that's up to you. We do have a little bit of clearance back here at the USB port, so where it's not right up against the carbon. That's always something that I would get concerned about, because, you know, as we crash, we have jolts, we have movement, whether that's micro movement, and if this USB port were to be right up against some of the carbon, then that micro movement could possibly loosen up our USB port. Technically speaking, we only need the centerpiece. We don't need the outside housing. But oftentimes when those things break off, the whole thing comes off, not just one part. Also out here on the arms with the motors, notice they've got, it's not a washer on these. It's just, I can't remember what you call these screw type, like a flange screw type out here. It provides a little bigger head, but it's kind of in a non-traditional format here out on the outer end to keep your motors secured. And we do have motor protection. So if you go flying and crashing and you hit here, if you have the right angle on whatever you hit, it'll hit out here on the carbon before it hits the motor and damages your motor. So, you know, that's a nice little touch. I can't argue too much with that. Something that we oftentimes don't have much anymore. Again, I think the biggest thing that people are going to want to know is longevity. How well is it going to do over the long haul? And that's really hard to tell, and that's why during the flight footage, I asked for anyone who's had a DarwinFPV product to leave their experience down in the comment section below. So if you're investigating this quad or another quad on DarwinFPV's website, that you can go down in the lower part of this video and hopefully get some feedback from other people who have purchased these and experiences they've had. Maybe you got one that didn't work right out of the box. What was it like going through support with DarwinFPV? Maybe you needed a replacement part. Were you able to find that replacement part from DarwinFPV, or did you have to go to something different altogether? In the moment, I see that DarwinFPV only sells either through their website or through AliExpress. AliExpress is a website that I've used before. It's more of a marketplace than anything else. I think most of us are getting more and more familiar with these marketplaces, as most sites are becoming marketplaces, whether it's Amazon or Walmart or places like AliExpress. They have a lot of their different products for DarwinFPV listed on AliExpress, but I do not see this one on their website just as of yet. It did not come with a mount, and I don't see where a mount is an option for a camera like an Insta360 Go or Go 2 or a naked GoPro. I think it's viable on this. I think it can handle that weight in sort of a cruisy, flat flying sort of scenario, but it's just not there. It doesn't mean that you can't fashion your own or figure something else out. You know, I have done some silly things when it comes to mounting little HD cameras, and one of the things that I was looking at with this was maybe attempting it by taking a rubber band and running it through either maybe this slot and then looping it underneath the top plate and around here to kind of grab it from both sides with the rubber band and butting it up against the back end of my battery. You know, that's something that we can do if you like to do that sort of thing rather than design a print that will work out. But I'm sure you could probably find a print or design a print if you're into that sort of thing, if you choose to. Yeah, at $69.99, it's hard to find a quad at that price point. So if you're interested, there'll be 2 links down in the video description, one to DarwinFPV's website and one to DarwinFPV's AliExpress store. You can look at those to see if they have this product or another product that you might be interested in. And also make sure you check out those comments to see what other people's experiences are. If you have any comments, questions, suggestions, or otherwise, please let me know in the comments section below. I appreciate your time, and thanks for watching.